Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today on GRC services. Our goal today is to really educate people on the breadth of GRC services that are available to help companies increase their security and to become more compliant. So we have a fairly broad topic today around the types of services that are available and the value of those to your individual companies. We'll have two presenters today. I will do a short introduction, and then I'm going to turn over to one of our GRC experts, Oscar Jones, and he will guide you through the rest of the journey. I just want to do one slide on e-security solutions. Many of you are customers already, but if you're not a customer, again, every time we switch, this thing goes crazy. If you're not a customer, we have a very simple business. We want to be your one-stop security partner for your company, and we offer three main solutions, which covers pretty much everything you need in security, which is governance, risk, and compliance services, which we're going to talk about exclusively today. Security products, meaning we can resell products from security vendors, from almost all the security vendors in the industry, and we can provide managed security or managed detection and response, including SIEMs and SOCs and things like that. So we're here to provide everything to help you achieve your goals. And customers normally are in three different categories of either focused on compliance, which most of today's audience is, or we care about strong security as a goal, or maybe we don't care a lot, but we at least need to cross the T's and dot the I's. We're focused mostly on the compliance and strong security groups here today. These are just some of the vendors that we work with in terms of products. So a couple of slides in introduction. First of all, there's various things that companies need in terms of security, in terms of security goals, like defining the gaps and defining their priorities, right? If you're going to create a budget for the next year, you want to make sure you're spending money on the right things that are the highest priority. And to do that, you can do that by defining, by doing risk assessments. You want to define your security roadmap and your strategies. You need to acquire those solutions. You need to reduce your employee risk. You need to do prevent, detect, and respond, which is really what regulations are telling you to do. And you need to make sure that you revise your security plan annually. You document what you're doing, and if necessary, certify what you're doing as being true. If you look at the information management security process that are defined in most regulations, they start with risk assessments and gap analysis as a step one in order to define your appropriate plan, implement, monitor, and respond, and then manage that and make sure you're documenting your compliance. So just if you take that same risk management process, there are different GRCs. So in the black boxes, these are governance, risk, and compliance solutions that tie into these different steps in your management security process. So step one is the gap analysis, security testing like pen tests and so forth, doing compliance audits, depending upon where you are and how serious your security requirements are. But that's step one. That educates you so that you can do your planning. You can create your security roadmap and provide your incident response plans, implement it by acquiring products and managed services or security services, and then do your compliance tracking and management policies and procedures. Monitoring response, normally people today talk a lot about MDR, managed detection response, NDR, third-party security management. There's the monitoring is you cannot just implement, but you must monitor and then respond, right? And then lastly, managed security, incident response, remediation, round out these kinds of services. So that's how it ties into the process. I wanted to make it real and tie it in terms of purpose. And with that, just one more slide. This is just an overview of GRC services that we offer, which we're going to talk about today. They're categorized in like security risk assessments and testing, audits, readiness and certification, and custom services as groups. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Oscar.
All right. So let's get started. So let's talk briefly about, evolving threat landscape and how today's cybersecurity environment works and looks. So let's talk about advanced persistent threats, sophisticated attacks, campaigns using zero-day exploits and living off, land techniques. And basically what we mean by this is, when you see a persistent attack, what is it doing? What is the goal of it? And you may see an event that's occurring right before your eyes, but you don't know the reasoning behind it. You don't know what type of information they're trying to gain. You don't know what kind of data they're trying to steal. So you got to ask yourself the question: if I were a threat actor, what would I do? How would I gain this information? Because a threat actor is thinking about using a zero-day. You don't have time. There hasn't been any documentation created for it. No one knows why it's happening. They have an idea of, the occurrence and where it actually got in, but they don't understand what's the purpose, because every threat actor has a purpose or a reasoning of why they're trying to do it. But that takes us to ransomware and extortion. They're trying to steal information, data points, and then basically give it back to you as if to say, I took all this data, but I don't want to utilize it against you. I don't want to put it on the dark web unless you don't pay me. And this is where the extortion piece comes in. Ransomware attacks are getting more and more complicated. We see them every single day. Most of them we don't hear about because they're happening in the background. And most companies, when they do occur, they're really actually embarrassed, that they had controls that were lax. Their compliance may not have been up to par, but they want to make sure that two things are happening. The threat actors are looking at you and saying, okay, this was easy, way too easy to get in. If you don't have, like some type of trap set for them, some kind of honey trap, basically where you can, call them into an environment where they think they're safe and they're seeing all this data points, which actually may be fake data, and they will try to steal everything from you. So you got to, always be worrying about what's next, what's going to happen. And how do you do that? Because there's a lot of different ways you could go through it. You can call your insurance company. You can start looking at the log environment within your internal environment, and how does it, how has it changed within the last 24-hour time period? But the goal is to see what's happening today, how it's going to change going forward, because we haven't even started talking about AI components yet. AI can think way faster than you can. That's why a lot of threat actors now utilize it. And then we start talking about supply chain attacks, your third-party vendors. And why are third-party vendors important? Because that's where most threat actors get in. They come in through a third-party vendor that may not have the same amount of controls that you may currently have in your environment, because a lot of them are smaller. They don't have the IT team. They don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the CapEx that is utilized or necessary for them to actually prevent someone from getting in. They may still have Windows 95 servers. And I know, some people laugh when I say that, but Windows 95 servers and systems are still prevalent in county governments, health environments, and various other smaller companies. They still use Windows 95. And you may think, well, how is that possible? Because when Windows 95 came out, a lot of individuals put a lot of time and effort and money into that. And so they never stopped using it. Now, there hasn't been any support in over 20-something years, but they still utilize it. One perfect event was in the county government of Fulton in Georgia. They had a Windows 95 machine sitting in a closet, and that the threat actors were able to get in and actually steal data from there through that system because it was connected network-wide. And then insider threats, my favorite topic. So who do you trust and who do you not trust? Is your environment segregated? So you got compromised insiders with access to sensitive data and systems, and it may not necessarily be them being compromised. It just means that they may not understand the breadth of everything that they're responsible for. They may not understand how much data points that they are looking at. And so you can call someone who may not be well versed in your environment. Let's say it's a new employee. He's only been looking at the documentation and he's getting mentored by someone, and they are having conversations with him, but he may not know exactly what needs to happen if someone calls him and asks him a specific question. So you got to make sure that your insiders know all the right relevant information, You need to make sure that you're taking them by the hand and listening to them and making sure that they're trained properly before you put them on the calls. Because if you think about MGM, over $100 million stolen because of someone who had started 2 weeks prior and didn't understand exactly what they were doing. So what is the business imperative for proactive security? So we have to start moving beyond reactive fixes to deliver a holistic security program. And the reason I say that is because, you know, we're very reactive. Something happens and then we react to it to figure out, okay, what happened? Who do we need to call? Who do we need to be involved in this process? The question should be, how can we become way more proactive to prevent these from actually occurring and actually affecting our systems? Because now you got to look at your reputational risk, you know, and that's all we really have is our reputation. Once that's gone, it is incredibly difficult to get it back. Sometimes it's impossible. You have seen a multitude of companies that were, you know, top of the heat one day, and because they had an event that they could not afford to get out of, they went out of business. And now you got to also think about risk understanding. And if you notice, looking at evolving threat landscapes and business imperatives, they actually correlate to each other. Because your risk understanding could be from a ransomware perspective, it can also be from a supply chain perspective. Because if I understand the risk that I have currently in my internal environment, and I do a comparison of the risk that I've identified with my third-party vendors, we're all in the same boat. So if I look at a heat map and I do a comparison of it, and I look at my risk matrices, how often am I actually looking at that information and data points? Am I looking at risk from a perspective of trying to understand how to prevent that risk, or am I looking at it from a sense of trying to mitigate that risk? And if so, what steps do I take? Do I have a program built out to make sure that everyone understands exactly what that means? And then when I'm having those conversations with my third-party vendors and my internal team, am I making sure that they understand what I'm actually referring to? Because we can say a bunch of things, but if it doesn't have a meaning for the individual we're speaking to, then it won't matter at the end of the day. So then you got to think about, am I still in compliance? You know, how do I achieve regulatory compliance and insurance readiness? And insurances have changed quite a bit in the last few years. Now you've got to do certain things. You've got to make sure you're doing penetration testing on a consistent basis. You've got to make sure you're doing phishing on a consistent basis. If you do that, most insurances will, you know, take you. We work very closely with Chubb Insurance because they, you know, one of the top tier according to Gartner. But it's really about, do you have the right things in place for them to actually cover you? And we'll go into a little bit more in depth into that a little bit later on in the documentation. But it's really about understanding, you know, what do you have enough insurance? Do you have enough insurance to cover your environment? If you're making $1 billion a year, do you think that $1 million worth of insurance will actually cover you? Most definitely not. So you got to make sure that you have the right amount of insurance. You got to make sure that you're remaining in compliance with any of the frameworks, whether it be ISO, whether it's SOC, even if you're looking at certain parameters such as NYDFS or CCPA, you just got to make sure that you're making the right decisions to move forward. And then last piece, business continuity. How often are you testing that BCP process? Are you doing it on a consistent basis? Are you doing it quarterly, or are you doing it annually? Because if you find an issue in January, most likely, and you haven't done any testing since December, that issue has been there the entire time. You just didn't make any changes to it. All right, so let's go to the next page. So comprehensive cybersecurity service pillars. Let's talk about risk assessment, red team attack simulations. Because I want you to test me. I want you to make sure that if I have a red team looking at my environment, I want to make sure that the things that they can see and they can do are the only individuals that can do it. And this comes with penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, network and wireless assessments, and IoT security testing. IoT has been around for a while, but most companies still aren't really doing anything with it. And they're not really testing their wireless networks. If someone were to sit in the parking lot of your company, could they get into your wireless network? Do you have it segregated properly? Are you doing penetration testing consistently? And if you are doing that, What are you doing with the results? Are you looking at the comparison of the results for the penetration testing? And if so, what changes are you making? If you're finding something that's critical, how soon are you making sure that that's a corrected issue? And if you're not having those conversations with your change management board and the senior leadership team, you're missing an opportunity to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So looking at security gaps assessments, framework specific assessments, as we mentioned before, SOC 2, ISO, PCI, people are really doing a lot more PCI work, but really the gaps that I've seen within some of doing those is astronomical. You know, some companies will say, well, we'll get to it later, or we don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower to get it done. You got to make sure you're having those conversations consistently. Because if I stop talking about something, guess what happens? It doesn't go away, it just festers in the background. So I want to do gap identification and prioritization. I want to do security roadmap and development, and also want to do strategic security planning. Has to happen. It has to happen consistently. Because if you miss an opportunity, then the threat actor will definitely take it. So now let's talk about compliance and audit readiness, regulatory readiness assessments, maturity and FedRAMP, ISO 27001, HIPAA and high trust, cyber insurance compliance. We spoke about these briefly earlier, but it's really about how do you stay in the moment? How do you make sure that you're maintaining your processes and having the right conversations with the right people and the right teams? And then your custom GRC, vCISO services. Do you have a separate team that you brought in to help you and to alleviate a resource constraint? Incident response planning. Are you having those right conversations? Are you doing an incident response as a service? A lot of companies aren't even really thinking about that right now because they wait until an incident happens instead of preparing for an incident to come. And we all know that incidents are going to occur, whether they may be a small issue that turns into an incident, or it could be something that we just haven't paid attention to over a long period of time. And then you got to make sure you're doing your policy and procedure development, as well as creating and maintaining playbooks, because we can create a run book all day, but are we maintaining it? Are we actually making the changes and doing the updates on a consistent basis? So building a resilient security posture for your organization is extremely important. So now let's look at it from a 360-degree risk view. So, you got to provide your organization with a risk landscape, scrutinize your infrastructure, test your human defenses, identify and prioritize risk. The fun part for me is the human defenses, because most of the people that work for you will see the issue way before you will. They'll say, hey, my system is running slow and I noticed that this happened, or my system was running slow, or I was trying to click on something and my screen was flashing. That's your human defense. But also scrutinize your infrastructure. How well is it built? Who's testing it? Who's monitoring it? And if they are monitoring, how are they doing so? And if they see an anomaly, who do they contact? So this goes through your process that has to be created and maintained and reviewed and tested. So you got to identify and prioritize risk. What's the most important risk to your environment? Is it going to be monetary? Is it going to be your cloud environment? Is it going to be your on-site environment? There's several different questions you have to ask yourself. But if you look at the key benefits, having a proactive defense that we said earlier, and risk prioritization is extremely important, because as my risk increase, I have to be ready to pivot. You think about if your house is burning, what's the first thing you do? You look for the fire extinguisher. Now, if the fire becomes too big, you got to call 911 to bring people in to help you put out the fire. Same concept within business. Think about every event as a potential out of control fire. Who do you contact? Who do you relay that information to? So if you follow those steps, it'll be easier for you. But a lot of times what happens is when an event occurs, without us having a proper defense, we panic. And when we panic, we start to make mistakes. So the goal is to be prepared when any event occurs, no matter when it happens. That makes you ready to pivot as soon as something occurs. Now we have a process in place. Now we know exactly what we need to do. We know who we need to call. So the assessment components are red team, the multi-layered attack simulations, vulnerability scanning, IoT security, Internet of Things, device testing, penetration testing, network assessments, and social engineering. I personally think that social engineering is probably one of the one thing that we really cannot prepare for. We can call individuals, we can test them, but in real time, people start to make mistakes, and they will continue to make mistakes no matter how much testing you do, because people just aren't ready to understand the amount of pressure that they're going to be on. Whether that's somebody saying that you need to make a payment to a foreign company at the end of the day on Friday, and if so, who should they call to verify that information? A lot of companies don't do that. Companies lose money every week by not being prepared for when those calls come in. So you got to make sure you understand your vulnerabilities. That's essential. Let's move on to the next page. So what is a red team? The objective-based multi-layered attack simulations designed to test the effectiveness of your entire holistic security program. So what's the key distinction? Unlike traditional penetration testing, they focus on finding vulnerabilities. And there is not a person on this call that doesn't have a vulnerability somewhere in their environment. No matter how much testing you've done, no matter how you looked at the last reports, you looked at your risk register, you missed something. And it may be something small that festers, or it may be something that you're aware of, but because you don't have the time and the resources to complete it, to fix it, it's going to stay there. And you're going to start to worry now, like, okay, I know I still have a critical issue, but I don't have the resources to fix it. If I call someone from the outside, how much are they going to charge me? So, start having those conversations today as opposed to tomorrow. So here's a real world example, simulating an apparent persistent threat that groups start spear phishing emails targeting specific employees, leading to initial access, lateral movement across the network, privilege escalation, and data exfiltration. And this happens mostly with a lot of the senior leadership, because the rules are a little different for senior leadership. They change their password, but sometimes they don't change their password to what our rules say, because they don't have the time. So when they don't have the time, they become a target. They also give out their phone number and email address a lot more than most. So that means you're gonna start seeing a lot more emails. So, and if one of those emails has a particular link in it and they're not really paying attention to that day and they click on something, now you have created an issue. Now that person's going to start sending out spam messages. I recently had a customer that was sending out 300 emails per hour. They didn't realize it for 2.5 days. They didn't notice it until individuals started calling them, complaining about all the emails they were receiving. So it does happen. We just have to make sure that we have one set of rules for everyone, so that no one's surprised, and everyone's doing the same thing. If everyone's doing the same thing, it makes your job a lot easier. When you have specific components that aren't doing the same thing, that's when your job becomes a little bit more difficult. So here's our methodology: planning and scoping. These are the most important pieces. Define your objective, rules of engagements, and target systems with you. Recon, gather intelligence on your organization, just as a real attacker would. This is what the red team is going to do. And then execute. They're going to retrieve objectives, technical exploit, social engineering, and physical intrusion, and then post-engagement analysis, provide detailed report on the attack path. How did they get in? And when they got in, what did they do? Where did they go? How far were they able to actually go into your network? So you want to see a realistic assessment, right? You don't want to have any parameters set up that say, okay, you can do this, but you can't do that, because you don't get a true view at that point. And what are the gaps? What gaps did they actually identify? And when they identified those gaps, did they send any notes? Did they make sure that they were documenting that properly? And then they also want to train the blue team, because it's going to be invaluable, because you want to look at it in a controlled environment. So you had the red team, no rules. They just go and do exactly what they were designed to do. To make sure that they find any gaps, they report back. So now there are no surprises for you. You know exactly where your holes are. But the end goal is to identify and prioritize the risk before they can be exploited by someone who does not care about your business and just want to steal all of your data. So the red team exercises the mimics of the attack from a threat actor and techniques and procedures to achieve a defined goal, whether that be monetary or whether that may be to steal information and data. So penetration testing, network penetration testing. Assess external and internal networks identify unpatched systems and weak configurations, test network segmentation effectiveness. We see it all the time. We talk about what is a network pen test and how good is it? Does it help us? Does it actually build us up? And if you're doing it the right way, you're going to find out from your external and internal side, you're going to know exactly what's going on. You're going to see that weak configuration. You're going to see that SQL injection that's sitting on your environment because you haven't done patches in about 2 or 3 months time frame because you haven't had the time or the resources to test them. You've left yourself in a vulnerable position. So again, this goes back to scoping, information gathering, vulnerability analysis, active exploitation, and reporting. Extremely important because it's going to happen. It's already occurred. If you're not doing network pen testing consistently, you're going to see those holes grow larger and larger. And your goal and the whole premise is to make sure you're minimizing those. So if I'm a threat actor and I see that you have the latest up-to-date patches and your configurations are being monitored consistently, you don't have any SQL injections hanging out in the environment, then I'm going to be more apt to actually bypass you because I don't want to have to put in extra effort to get into your network because you've done the things that you're supposed to. So looking at your web application testing, testing websites and web application, identify OWASP top 10. I think SQL injection has probably been number 1 or 2 within the last 20 years, and check for SQL injection and XSS. Those are the top 2. And then your application testing, testing thick clients, thin client applications, identifying vulnerabilities in your code and environment, whether or not you're using something like a Rapid7 or Veracode, or are you looking at it from a CI/CD standpoint? So looking at your mobile application security as well. And I've noticed that more and more companies, are creating mobile applications that are doing more and more, whether it be health related, whether it be financial related. There's certain aspects that more companies are utilizing daily in order to make sure that the right information gets to the right people, but also making sure that that information and data is secure. So you want to make sure it's comprehensive at the end of the day. You want to make sure your pen test is comprehensive. You want to make sure your risk level assignment utilizes industry standards and evidences of exploitation. If you can see it, if you can find it, make sure that you are looking at it from a perspective of looking from a threat actor, and then remediation and recommendations. What do we need to do next? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen in the future? And if so, what steps do we need to take? All right, one of my favorite subjects, social engineering and OSINT testing. So open source intelligence, before launching a social engineering campaign, we conduct OSINT to gather publicly available information. And every one of our employees either have a LinkedIn account, they have a Facebook account, they have something such as Instagram. They have something out there. No one that I've ever met in the last 20 years just has an email address for work, because we all like to have conversations with people that we haven't connected with in years. Facebook. You know how many times Facebook gets broken into and cracked and scanned for data? So many times that Facebook has stopped reporting it. That's how often it actually occurs. So looking at public records when I'm doing an open source, social media, professional networks, and technical resources. This includes GitHub and technical blogs, and it's all out there and it's free information. It's not like, people are hiding that data. For the most part, we always tell too much information on Facebook, and people don't even think about it because they think because it's secure and they're putting it online, don't worry about it, it should be fine. But that's where, if I'm a threat actor, I'm going to start there. I'm going to start looking up information, start gathering data so I can utilize that later on when I start doing phone calls. So, looking at phishing, sending crafted emails to trick employees to revealing credentials. It happens, consistently. If anyone on the call has ever used anything such as KnowBe4, we know some people who have failed those particular tests. Smishing, leaving text messages or leveraging text messages for malicious purposes. We get the ones, about the tolls here in the Northeast, or we get the ones that state, oh, you owe a certain amount of money, it has to be paid within a certain period of time. And my favorite is when you get a call from the IRS saying that you owe money, but if you go buy an Apple gift card, you can take care of that bill today. People still fall for that. And we all have either elderly parents or relatives in our family, they are very susceptible to falling for that. There have been an increase in romance scams. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Um, People have a tendency to want to be connected to someone, so they fall for it. And that gets us into phishing. Using a phone call to impersonate someone. I think the favorite ones recently has been, you get a phone call from someone that shouldn't be in trouble, and they need bail money, and the threat actor will actually send an Uber to your house to pick up the money for you as a convenience. They won't even charge you a fee for it. So it does happen to people, and we've seen it happen too many times, and it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse as AI becomes more and more prevalent. People will start falling for these almost, I would say, daily. It's not hourly, but it's going to happen. And then a physical pretexting, attempt to gain physical access to facilities by impersonating a staff or a vendor. Happens all the time. So what's the most important vulnerable part of a security system? People. That's why we have to make sure we're training people. That's why we have to make sure we're testing people. We're showing them, what is going to happen in the future. It may not happen today, because if you can teach a person to be stronger and not fall for a social engineering test at work, that will actually help them at home as well. Because that's what people are looking for. They're looking for somebody to just make those steps, because people think that we're safe when we're at work. There are no issues. People are going to take care of us. But when we're at home, who's watching out for us? So if you have a strong employee and you show them the things that they should be looking for, as far as the threat actor is concerned and stealing information, they'll become even a stronger person for you in the office. Now, supply chain and third-party vendor management. So vendor identification and tiering, identify all third-party vendors. Who are your critical vendors? Who are your high-level vendors? Those vendors that you currently have, are you having those conversations? Are you testing their environment? Are you calling them? Are you actually verifying that the information that they're giving you, that you're sending that risk assessment out, is actually true? I've seen where you send a risk assessment out to someone, they'll look at it, they'll answer the questions, and they'll give you all the answers that you want. It may not be the right information, and it may not be actually provable, but they'll tell you that. Because if someone checks all the boxes, we have a tendency to not really go after them. So we kind of, we say, all right, we'll take their word for it until something happens. So if you think about classifying by access levels, how much access do they have? Do they have full, unadulterated access to your environment? Or are they limited? Are they coming in through a tunnel? VPN connectivity, we're verifying the data that they send us. Are we doing that? So how are we classifying our vendors? And how are we prioritizing high risk vendors? That the ones that actually take health information, that takes financial data. Are we actually verifying that everything that they're telling us and have told us is actually true? So security posture and evaluation, questionnaires and documentation reviewing. That's essential. We have to do it consistently. I would personally do it every quarter, just in case there are changes on their side. From a SOC 2 and ISO 27001 certification review. Are you maintaining that certification? Do you have any direct technical testing? Only when applicable. Are you doing that, whenever the time frame, you're keeping that calendar up to date, right? We got to test this client because last year they failed, questions 3 through 7. We got to make sure that they're better and they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And are we doing risk assessment reporting? Are we actually looking at those risks that they bring to us and we're actually making the changes in our environment? Or are we deciding that we still keep that group as a vendor? Most companies don't have that conversation because we get a vendor, we get comfortable with that vendor, and we never want to change from that vendor. Sometimes you got to make the tough decision to do so. So in contractual control recommendations, because you're having conversations back and forth, mitigation strategy development, and then from a continuous monitoring standpoint, ongoing vendor risk management, regular compliancy audits, and timely remediation of any emerging risk that you can see coming from their side to you, and also from your side to them, because it's not a one-way street. It has to be twofold. All right, security gap assessment. So what is your current security? When was the last time you looked at your existing policies and procedures, implemented technical controls, and current security awareness? Now, remember, we talked about security awareness, which is something that has to basically go consistently. If you just do it once a year, you have a gap already created because you didn't even realize that because your security audit is not happening. People forget. Over a period of time, people get so busy with work, they get so many emails on a daily basis that sometimes they start to make mistakes. When they make these mistakes, what happens? Who's watching the hen house, basically? If you want the fox to watch the hen house, and this is the threat actor looking at you from the outside, like, okay, I see this person's weak in controls. Okay, I'm going to attack them. So you identify your gaps from a framework-based assessment, and then also utilizing industry best practices, CIS controls, NIST, cybersecurity control frameworks, and identifying standards and regulations. So the gap assessment process, as you see at the bottom, and I don't know if you can tell that there's a pattern, right? Scoping, I feel like scoping is the most important piece because you put in all that work. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
I just want to interrupt real quick. So when we did the original survey or polls, I think there was 100% had not done any kind of security gap analysis or third-party gap analysis or security audits. And I just wanted to emphasize this is really an essential thing. And maybe people have a preconceived notion that it has to be super expensive. One thing that eSecurity is amazingly good at, having been servicing small to mid-sized companies for the last 25 years, is that we are really good at helping companies do gap analysis to help you define your prioritized solutions for your next 12 to 18 months. And that does not have to be an expensive proposition. And if you don't do that, you are more likely to end up spending too much money on something and too little on something else. And so this is really an essential thing, and we can help you with that. And it doesn't have to be, a budget buster. And the other thing I wanted to mention, Oscar, is you might need to move a little bit faster just so you can get through your slides.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I appreciate that. So looking at gap assessment process, scoping, data collection, control analysis, gap identification, and reporting. If you think about it like a project plan, this will essentially keep you out of trouble, because you're going through step by step. And, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. But if you have any follow-up questions, you can either reach out to myself or Tom, and we'll be more than happy to help you. All right, framework-specific assessment. So looking at CIS controls, scoping, and data collection, define assessment scope, gather current policies and procedures, collect technical controls information. And if you're doing so, then you're doing a good job, but most aren't. They're not, as Tom stated earlier, a lot of companies aren't doing gap analysis. They don't even know how to begin it. But if you do that, it'll save you time in the long run. So looking at from a NIST perspective, control analysis, compare against framework controls, determine implementation status, and document gaps and exceptions. Extremely important. Your gaps will always come back to bite you if you don't cover them and close them out in a timely manner. So looking at gaps in identification and prioritization, identifying all gaps in the implementation process, also prioritizing by risk level, and considering impact and likelihood of how often or how they may actually happen in your environment. And then industry standards, reporting and recommendations, comprehensive gap report, provide actionable solutions, and recommend remediation strategies. Key benefits, benchmark security maturity, identify vulnerabilities, and ensure compliance with standards. So this is really a measure of your security framework. Now, how do you prepare for a formal assessment? So CMMC and FedRAMP, assessment for Defense Industrial Base Organization of Federal Contractors, navigating through the maturity levels and FedRAMP security controls. GLBA, evaluation for financial institutions. Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which has been around for about 35 years now. Proactive assessments, identifying gaps before official audits. ISO 27001, I feel like I've become an expert. Evaluation of ISMS frameworks for establishing, implementing, and improving information security. Extremely essential. And PCI DSS, I'm actually in the process of doing a PCI audit right now and an ISO audit, which, there's a big difference between the two, but if you're doing an attestation of compliance, it will all come out for you, but just got to make sure you're doing the work on the back end. So for PCI, you got to make sure that you're doing, focusing on a network security and data protection for credit card usage and accepting payments. And then HIPAA, high trust, focusing on protected health information, PHI data, And then we've spoken briefly about cyber insurance. Why is it extremely important? Because it covers you in the event of a breach, and making sure that no surprises are coming by, because you have someone who has your back in the event of a threat actor actually getting access into your environment. So looking at proactive assessment, identifying gaps before official audits, streamlined preparation, systematic approach to readiness, and risk reduction, mitigating potential audit findings. Now, looking at it from a regulatory readiness assessment, CMMC and FedRAMP controls for protecting unclassified information, CUI, navigating through different CMMC levels, always maturity, security controls required for government contracting. Extremely important, because if you want to have a government contract, you're going to have to become CMMC or FedRAMP regulatory ready. And GLBA for financial institutions and compliance, and evaluation of safeguards, rule adherence, and protection of non-public information. So ISO, ISMS, framework for establishing and implementing security and continual improvement processes, PCI, credit card and credit card data holders, navigating a network security and configuration standards, and access control and protection measures, and with HIPAA focusing on PHI data and high trust CSF, which takes about 6 to 9 weeks, depending on how much information you're doing, unless it's a rapid testing or rescoring. So our approach, tailored assessment processes for each framework, gap identification and prioritization, and clear recommendations for remediation. So as you see at the bottom, we're not an authorized certification entity, but provide strategic guidance and assessments for compliance. Cyber insurance compliance. And I stated that we would talk about this a little bit more. So here's that time. So this one is really about more policy analysis. Review insurance application to identify required controls, understand specific security requirements. They're going to ask you certain questions. They're going to give you basically a document or a Excel spreadsheet, and you will fill out all information, and they will tell you at the end whether or not you are actually approved for an evaluation of insurance. If they are not, they will send you to a secondary environment. But that comes with the gap assessment, evaluating security measures against requirements, identifying gaps in coverage. Again, if you have $1 billion company and only have $1 million of insurance, you obviously do not have enough insurance to cover you in the event of a threat actor or a crisis in your environment. So remediation, developing actionable plans to address gaps, identify security controls. What are the key benefits? Avoiding denied coverage. If you do that, you're on your own, so to speak. Lower insurance costs. What is your monthly rates going to be, and your regulatory compliance? So really about the peace of mind when it matters most. If you think about life insurance, you think about car insurance, the same concept. If you've had a lot of accidents in the past, you most likely will be denied coverage in the future. So now let's look at security roadmap and development. So this is really a strategic vision. It's really a strategic plan that translates, how do you look at the initiative, your roadmap develop, short-term initiatives, mid-term initiatives. So looking at strategically aligns with business objectives. Consider your budget and resources. Adapt to operational realities, initiate prioritization. What's most important? Based on your risk and assessment findings, what do you care about the most? What are your short-term wins and your long-term goals? Short-term win is something that's going to be, low-hanging fruit. What is your long-term goal? Is what are we actually trying to accomplish? Are we trying to get our compliancy and our certification and maintain it? And if so, how are we going to do that? So you want to also have a clear timeline with milestones, your resource planning, technology investments. What am I buying this year? Am I paying for AWS? What am I going to buy this year? Am I going to utilize new systems? And if so, how much is it going to cost me? And what kind of training programs am I also going to have? So your implementation and management, clear execution plans, key performance indicators, and regular process reviews. We've spoken about that since the beginning of this documentation and review process, and we'll continue to talk about that. So sustained security policies, procedures for ongoing management, and security in your organizational culture. Extremely important, because without that, you've already failed. You got to make sure you're creating something and it's making sense to you as you move forward in your environment. So now we're going to talk briefly about vCISO services. So vCISO brings, a real CISO to your environment to help you get over certain humps. So it's about strategic planning and governance, developing, overseeing comprehensive security roadmaps, governance frameworks and security roles. Basically, a vCISO, and I'll skip the rest of this, it basically helps you sleep at night. It brings an environment where we're doing the work for you. We're looking at your environment. We're actually doing the hard labor, having the business unit interviews, talking to the senior leadership team, making sure that you understand exactly what we've seen and how we're going to get past the hump. How are we going to actually make sure that everything that we're doing makes sense for you, and how do we move forward? Because we want to become an integral part in that process. That is what a vCISO does. They take the heavy load and makes it a little bit lighter lift for you as you continue to grow in your environment. So it's really strategic leadership without their overhead. So it's a lot less cost. You don't have to spend, $300,000. It may only cost you $150,000. Incident response services, IR planning, development of a comprehensive IR plan, definition of roles, establishment of communication and protocols, coordination with legal and PR teams. Extremely important because people are going to ask questions. They're going to want to know, how did this breach happen? What are you guys doing to get us back to where it was before? So you're going to have to answer all of those questions, but you also want to make sure that the right information is going out. Because if the right information is not going out, people are going to have even more questions, which is going to put you at a reputational risk. So this comes down to preparation, detection, response, and recovery. IRAS, a retainer-based service with on-demand access, immediate support for investigation, expertise in containment and eradication, and significantly reducing your response times. Hands-on support with breaches, forensics analysis to find out how did the person get in and what did they take, and when are you going to hear from them? A lot of times the threat actor will take information and you won't hear from them for a few days because they're deciding on what they're going to do with the information and sifting through what type of information they actually receive from you. And guidance on recovery procedures and post-breach reporting and restoration. How do we come back from this? That's really what an incident response service really is. So why partner with eSecurity for a GRC solution? Proven expertise, industry-leading professionals with specialized certifications. You want to make sure you're working with a company that has quite a few individuals that have been certified, hands-on experience with dealing with the latest threats and attack vectors, technical mastery across all 4 service pillars that we've spoken about earlier, and security as a business enabler, not just a technical requirement. Custom solutions tailored to your operational and organizational unique risk profile, because every company is different. We don't treat a company as just being just one conglomerate. It's all separate pieces, and clear return on investment through risk reduction and operational integrity. So how do you do that? Comprehensive approach, holistic security program, multi-layered defense strategy, and end-to-end solutions, and future-ready security. Extremely important, because what happened today can happen tomorrow. How do you prepare for it, and how do you get ready for it? So what are the next steps? Ready to transform your cybersecurity posture? Initial engagement, schedule a cybersecurity assessment, receive customized risk profile, gap analysis, identify security gaps, and develop remediation strategy and implementation, and deploy security solutions, and training staff on security protocols while also maintaining continuous improvement. Extremely important. So Tom, I will hand it over to you, sir.
Yeah, so just in closing, thanks everybody for joining. That we want to help customers regardless of whether you have a small need or a big need, whether this is something that you think we'd just like to get our security to be stronger we have a very intense need for a high level of compliance, and we have to document it and certify it. We can work with you regardless of where you are in that process. The ability to do like gap analysis and a third-party analysis of your security. It's like you don't want to be your own doctor, even though many of us are. We need to rely on third parties to help us understand these things. So we can get through this analysis and these things very quickly because we're very good at it. This is all we do. So we can help you with penetration tests or continuous penetration test is something that we're going to be adding that allows you to do penetration testing monthly or quarterly or annually. The ability to do gap analysis and do it quickly and efficiently. All the other stuff we talked about, whether it be audits and certifications or incident response, those are all things that we're here to help you do. And we want to be there and match our services with what your needs are. So don't assume that it's all or nothing, or that it's we can't afford to do the right thing. Everybody can afford to do the right thing. That is our philosophy, and we've been servicing small to mid-sized companies so long that we can't even think about a topic without thinking about how can we do it to match your needs and your budget, because that's just the way we've been trained to do it. So you can communicate with us. We will reach out to you. You can reach out to us, and we look forward to talking to you about your security needs, whether they be GRC services or managed security or security products. We want to be there as your one-stop solution provider. So thanks very much for attending. A great day, and we look forward to talking to you soon.